This week on the Veteran Ventures podcast, we have Mike Sherbakov. He's a former enlisted Marine, a very successful entrepreneur in his own right, and now he runs the Veteran Fund, which focuses on finding veteran leaders in business and enabling those companies to help progress America. He also finds time to go down to Mexico multiple times per year with teams of people to help build homes for people in need. And I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. Thanks for joining us.
Most people you talk to when transitioning out of the military have never actually transitioned out themselves. You're probably getting a bunch of opinions from people who plan on staying in until retirement and have no idea how to actually show empathy for your situation. This podcast is about providing fresh perspectives and a front row seat for conversations with successful veterans doing big things after leaving the military.
So, all right, great. So we can dive right back into it.
Wow. So Jack just saved this whole thing. So thank you for that. Anyway, so Mike, back to the question, the impetus for this is to give people a perspective into what's possible after service. And you're a great example of doing great things, not only for the veteran community, for the venture investing community, but also just for the world. I'd love to dig more into what you're doing for people and helping other people that are in difficult situations. But just to start off, if you could go into some of your background military wise and then transitioning out of the military.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Griffin. So the kind of quick version, and we can obviously unpack any part of this that you're interested in, is I grew up in the Bay Area. I guess even before that, it's an important part of the story is I'm a first generation immigrant to the country. So came here when I was 5 years old. I was born in Moscow and we had nothing. Like we came to this country with, I mean, if there was a definition of less than nothing, we probably had that. I remember like these kind of vivid childhood memories of my dad, I think, was able to borrow $500 and get this like little Hyundai hatchback. And it, from a weight capacity standpoint, we lived on this hill. And I remember he would pick us up from school and he'd have to stop the car at the bottom of the hill so we could all get out. So the hill could, the car could make it up the hill and into the driveway and we'd walk up the hill. And so like, I think humble beginnings is definitely a place where, and this will get into like the investment thesis and why we make the investments we do and the types of founders we do. I think that's an important part of the journey. And also just a sense of, pride and gratitude for this country. So grew up in the Bay. And when I graduated high school, I joined the Marines. And my oldest sister had gone to Stanford. My second sister had gotten a full ride to William and Mary, got her doctorate in neuroscience. My little brother ended up getting a master's from Berkeley and he's working at OpenAI now. And so you kind of see the direction where everyone in the family went and you can see where I went. And the reason I joined the Marines is, 9/11 hit close to home. There was something about it where I felt a deep pride for the country and wanting to defend country. And at the same time, at 18 years old, I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to see what I was made of. I grew up playing sports and there was this aspect of just wanting to push myself and see what I could do. So it was just this convergence of factors coming together. So enlisted in the Marines, spent 5 years on active duty and ended up in San Diego. And I'll go into what, from being in San Diego to doing the VC thing now. But I think an important part of this story is, in one generation, I shared about my siblings and the great things that they were able to do. My family, my parents have a farm now with horses and chickens and goats and alpacas and a llama. I say that because only in this country is that possible. Like in one generation, what my parents and what my family was able to do with, a work ethic and what's available to us in this country from a place of entrepreneurship and from a place of kind of creating your own destiny. And again, these are all little seeds of why the Veteran Fund and the work we do there is so important to me because this is my life's work. It's kind of the send the elevator back down model. It's the things I care most about. And it's my way of kind of giving back and hopefully protecting and advancing a country that's so important to me. So now the quick in between is I get out of the Marines, I go to school. I went to San Diego State for my undergrad. And when I graduated, I fell in love with entrepreneurship. I didn't see the corporate route being kind of the path for me. And I started what I knew was health and wellness. I studied kinesiology and psychology, and I started a company called HMS Fitness, which was, if you're familiar with a Fit Body boot camp, it was like this franchise model of fit body boot camps. and ended up, scaling that company and doing quite well with that. And ultimately selling that company, starting a yoga towel company. This was my first kind of entry point into social entrepreneurship. I had read a book called Start Something That Matters by Blake Mycoskie, who's the founder of Tom's. And I love this idea of having a business that created impact. And then, fast forward, I joined a venture-backed startup. It was called Fit In, and then rebranded to Wildfire, which was the competitor to ClassPass. So kind of, and learned all about, raising capital and hiring and growing really quickly. And then ultimately joined another company called Nourish Me that's now publicly traded. And so I took those skills as kind of a founder operator or being early at companies, brought that into the angel investing, made a number of angel investments, wanted to make sure that I could do it with my own capital before I took anyone else's. And then fast forward, it was 3 years ago where myself, three of my partners, Ryan, Justin, Lisa, came together. And, we had all had what I would consider successful careers up until that point, but we decided, like, what do we want to spend the next few decades of our lives doing? If we're going to put time, energy, and capital into something, what are the things we care most about? And that's where the thesis for the Veteran Fund, kind of came to be. And so we're 3 years in. We oversubscribed Fund One, which is great and probably the most challenging fundraising environment. We have 16 portfolio companies that are out there doing great work that have hit that inflection point where we validated the thesis of, veterans making great operators, entrepreneurs, founders. And we'll be back to market next year to raise a pretty sizable, probably $150 million fund too, with this whole core mission of advancing America through venture capital. So tried to do the best I could in a few minutes of like the time that's, 20 years we're condensing into a few minutes. So feel free we can kind of double click or unpack any of that you think it may be interesting to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, amazing background and story. I mean, what an incredible testament to America and to this country. But I'd love to zoom in just a little bit on you're getting out of the Marines. How did you choose the direction that you were going? What was really kind of fueling the choices there in that time frame?
Yeah, I did well when I was in the Marines. So I went in, and I'll elaborate what I mean by that. I went in as a comm tech. So I was at 59, 54. School was in Pensacola, Florida, first duty station, Kaneohe Bay. And then I was stationed at the air station at Camp Pendleton. And I ended up picking up a B billet. I taught McMap for the last 2.5 years I was in. So I was not an IT, but an MAI, tan belt or tan tab, black belt. And I love being in the Marines. I know everyone has different experiences in the military. I had such a good time. I mean, I was like, putting people through the O course, and it was awesome. And you can imagine when it was time to get out, I had trying to remember if I had 2 meritorious promotions or if it was 1 meritorious promotion. Anyway, like I picked up E5 sergeant pretty quickly. And so, also in the military, the higher rank you are, generally like the more fun you're having. The lower rank, it's not quite as fun. And, you can imagine that they wanted to keep me in. So they were throwing a lot of incentives my way, hey, you'll re-enlistment, you'll pick up staff sergeant in a few months and this, and I really want to jump school. I'm like, all the things. So there was a big pull to stay in. But ultimately, I remember, and I've shared this story before, there was a 72 or 96, this long weekend. And I put in a request for Thanksgiving. I put in a request to go see my family who lives in the Bay Area. And I remember there wasn't anything crazy happening that weekend, but that request came back denied. And I remember thinking in that moment, I'll never, be in a position unless I'm at war or something like that, where someone is going to tell me that I can't go see my family. And so the decision had kind of been made for me. So regardless of what incentives they were throwing or how great it was, this is also why I love entrepreneurship and that path, because you kind of, again, create your own destiny and it's a meritocracy. You kind of, you win or lose based on your performance. And so I had made the decision to transition out. And quite honestly, I wasn't exactly certain on what that next step would be. I was very lucky. My sergeant major at the time, knew, like, we had a pretty good relationship. And when I finally made that decision, they were piloting a new program to take enlisted Marines right into college. And I think at the time it was San Diego State and San Marcos were like the 2 San Diego universities where they fast tracked you without, having to do the community college route or all these other things. And they kind of, sat me down and were like, hey, you're going to be the guinea pig in this. Like, we trust, like, make us proud. And so I knew I would, like, if my transition and my time in college went well, then they could obviously start rolling this out. And I don't remember the name of the program, and I don't know. I imagine they rolled it out to a larger cohort since then. But yeah, I mean, it worked. I was in college. I was the one like sat in the front row, raised my hand, knew all the teachers by name, finished with like a 3.95 or something. So I wanted to be there. It's such a different experience going, I think, to college after the military than going when you're 18 years old. At least like for me, I think it would have been a very different experience. So that was the transition. I wish I could say I had a bigger part to play, but I think the Marines were also very helpful in that transition.
I want to know more about like the transition after college too. What was the next step that you took, and like how did you transition that into the next step?
Yeah. A big part of this that I didn't share is I had my son when I was 20 years old, and his mom is also a Marine. We met when we were stationed in Pensacola together. And, we're like best friends. We get co-parenting. He's 19 years old now. And the full circle story, the crazy thing is he's at San Diego State right now. He's a sophomore there. I've got a call with him actually right after this to catch up. So it's crazy how it's come full circle. But the reason that's important is when I was getting ready to graduate from San Diego State, I remember I was also in the Greek system. I was in Sigma Phi Epsilon, and I had built a pretty large network. And there were definitely kind of opportunities to jump into, we'll call it corporate, or like some like safe, consistent, like, here's your salary. This is just kind of what you do. And I also knew in order to support my son and living in San Diego, which I knew I wanted to stay there, that wasn't going to be the path for me. Also, to be quite honest, I kept remembering that time in the Marines where that request got denied. And I was like, I don't ever want to be in this position where someone tells me I can't go see my family. It's just like, I value freedom too much. And so entrepreneurship, although I knew nothing about it, became like, it just in my mind, I was like, this is what I'm going to do, because it's also, again, this kind of create your own destiny. It's all based on performance. And I really felt like I'd work as much as I needed to. And a quote that I love that's always stuck with me is when your why becomes big enough, you figure out your how. And my why was, this is for my son. This is for me to stay in San Diego. This is for me to prove to myself. And so there was like, I wasn't going to fail, which it's funny to even say out loud now, because those are the kind of qualities that we look for in the founders that we're investing in, right? Military veterans, they have such a deep why and such a deep mission. And so not knowing anything about entrepreneurship, I'm like, well, what do I know? What skills do I have? Again, my time in the Marines, okay, kinesiology and psychology. I feel like I'd be good at this fitness thing. And this like franchise model, I say slightly, they do it slightly differently now, but it was kind of a business in a box where they just said, like, follow these steps. Also, like, as a Marine, you're good at taking orders, like follow 1, 2. It was, I think, like a 10 DVD set. I was like, this is exactly how to do it step by step. And I followed it to a T, and, started my first location, second location, and hired a bunch of people, and ended up like growing this business pretty quickly. I mean, it was, 250,000 top line within like a year and a half. So that, I think it was just a combination of having a formula to follow and having a deep why made it like, I think that was probably the factor to success.
Given that
Yeah.
formula to follow, would you recommend others that are transitioning out to look into franchise ownership or that sort of, business in a box type model?
So this is a great question. And this is why I love what I do now. So I did this business in a box, like call it a franchise model, right? Then the second company that I mentioned, Karuna Towers, now we're kind of unpacking a little bit more. I like the social enterprise. And this is before the 1-for-1 thing got outplayed. Tom's model was buy a pair of shoes, give a pair of shoes. I was going through yoga teacher training at the time, because when I sold the company, I had a little bit of time and runway. I ended up doing yoga teacher training. Very random, I know, for a Marine to and go do yoga. And I saw, like, the entrepreneur mind is always like, the wheels are always turning. And I saw, hey, there are these mats or these towels you put over your mat when you do hot yoga. There were only 2 companies at the time. And why are they so expensive? So I ended up like manufacturing, kind of creating these anti-slip, antibacterial, antimicrobial towels. And I partnered with the Against Malaria Foundation. And so we had this 1-for-1, like buy a towel, give a bed net to a family in Africa. And so that was now like my own social enterprise, right? Not a franchise model, like figuring that out. Then I mentioned Wildfire, which was like this. I think you're all familiar with the class pass model, right? One membership, access to all these different studios. We ended up raising a bunch of venture capital. My friend David Metzler was the one that started that company. And so then I got the experience of, oh, here's a venture backed, like very fast growing startup and a marketplace and technology. That was my like first entry point into technology. And then the last company I mentioned, Nourish Me, which is a nutraceutical, like CPG. So now I'm like, I've got these different experiences with very different types of business. So the first one you could say is more lifestyle. Third one you could say is more of that, VC back. And what it ultimately like led me to is knowing these different types of models and paths available. This is why I ended up launching the Founder Institute program. And I don't know, Griffin, you and I may have chatted about this, but just the high level on this is Founder Institute is the world's largest startup accelerator. So if anyone has ever heard of Y Combinator or Techstars or 500 startups, we're kind of the precursor. It's really focused on 0 to 1 business building, like ideation to MVP, minimum viable product. And I had the opportunity to start that in Southern California. We now are anchored by JP Morgan Chase, and we give all veterans a fellowship to go through this program for free. But the reason I bring this up, and this is the long way of answering your question, because regardless of the type of business that someone wants to start, I think, in my opinion, that is like the best program you could possibly have, because in a very short amount of time, it's like boot camp, business boot camp. You're validating whether there's a there. You're actually testing two things. You're testing one, are you the entrepreneur to build this company? And two, does this business have legs? Is there something there? Are there actually customers that are going to be willing to pay for the solution that you're creating? And so that's why, and right now my time is split 80-20, 80% running the veteran fund, 20% is this Founder Institute program. That's again, this like 0 to 1 business boot camp, startup accelerator.
I have two questions with that. One is a little bit is go back to the entrepreneurial mindset, but the first one, you mentioned the JP Morgan Chase fellowship. Is that where they hire JMOs and bring them in, or is that something completely separate?
Totally different. No, this is, we at the Veteran Fund have had a long-term relationship with JP Morgan Chase, but they came in and they said, we want all veterans, military spouses, anyone from this military community to be able to go through this program for free. And so that's the program. They come in as mentors, they support with the program. And so if anyone ends up wanting to, work within their organization, but that's certainly a path. But this is specifically for giving all veterans and military spouses an opportunity to go from 0 to 1 with their business and go through this accelerator program for free.
Nice. And my other question was just with the entrepreneurial mindset, I feel like if you have that and you're in the military, likely you're surrounded by people who might not have that. And a big part of this podcast and the impetus for us starting, it was like, hey, you're probably getting advice from people who don't really know what the other side looks like. So were your parents entrepreneurial? It sounds like your siblings might have just kind of followed a path of education and maybe got jobs. What about entrepreneurship interested you? And then what advice would you give to somebody who's currently serving, who has that entrepreneurial, like, hey, I want to do it. I want to be my own boss, but also like maybe words of wisdom from somebody who's done it. Like it's not all green pastures.
Decided he would never get another pass denied.
Yeah. That's all it took.
It's interesting that Jack brings that up, because like if there was a secondary reason for getting out, it is exactly that. I remember there were just so many, because I was in charge of our comm shop, and I just remember there were so many times where I would offer an opportunity for us to do something way more efficient, save a bunch of money. Like there were so many inefficiencies. You guys in the military, it's ridiculous. And anytime I would try to offer a solution, it was shut down. Not because it wasn't a better solution, but like, it was just like, don't rock the boat. This isn't exclusive to the military, any large organization. These are the kinds of things that happen. This is why the startup economy will always exist, why venture capital will always exist, because there needs to be the emerging players that are innovating and iterating quickly. But in the military, ridiculously inefficient. And to be honest, the entrepreneurial mindset, at least in the enlisted corps, certainly does not do well. Like, I felt incredibly uncomfortable there. I'm like, let me out. I've got so much to do. And to your point on like the mindset piece, I don't know if it came from my parents. My dad, he is an entrepreneur. He would get hired by these, great companies like Maxim who put the audio chip in the iPhone. And he just has a very particular skill set. He did create his own company as kind of a consulting firm to work for these companies that wanted his skill set, but it's not like he ever had ambitions of scaling that, right? It's really just him as a solo shop. So I don't know if it really came from my parents or just like a natural curiosity, but what I do know is like, I can't stop thinking about it. Like there's something about, startups and innovation, and it's like, without going too with this stuff, like to me, it's like this modern day alchemy. It's like the idea that someone can have an idea or something that doesn't exist, and then it becomes real. And not only does it become real, but it starts affecting and impacting other people, and hopefully, positively. And there's just something incredible about that. So that's why I'm just genuinely interested in like supporting those people, like these people with crazy ideas that want to build cool stuff. And so as far as advice, Jack, to your point, I think it's a very simple answer. And that is like, follow that creativity. Like you guys doing this podcast, like who knows what this becomes? Even Joe Rogan talks about this all the time with his podcast. They're like, did you ever think it was going to be that big? He's like, no, I just wanted to get together with my friends and like talk. And I think there's something, it's so simple about that, where if there's a curiosity, if there's a passion and an interest, like just pursuing that, and I've shared with you, the reason I share my background with you is there was always this like passion in like, advancing this country too, because America's given so much to me and my family. And there's like, I just kind of kept following, like pulling on that little thread when it was as a founder. And then eventually I was like, wait a second, I really love this like investor thing and like venture capital, especially at the early stages. So I kept pulling that thread and, fast forward and here we are.
Mike, this is a super loaded question, but do you recommend people to take VC investments? How would you advise people to think through taking on capital and that whole process if they're starting a company or considering it?
Yeah, generally, no. I mean, I tell folks like, if you can build what you want to build without taking in capital, don't do it. It's a very specific type of company and business model, and it's a very different path, right? It really depends on what the founder wants to do. It is necessary for certain types of companies, but a lot of times people like myself got into entrepreneurship because they value freedom and they want that freedom. The moment you take in outside capital, whether it's friends and family, whether you want to admit it or not, you kind of have a boss. Like you have someone, and you have investors that are, they don't mind. It's like, go do what you want to do. But it's a very different dynamic than a bootstrap company where the founder or founders own everything. And so I think getting clear, and Founder Institute, the program I mentioned, does a really good job at helping founders decide, is this the type of company? Like, are you planning on, hyperscaling this? And in general, the outlooks we look for, every venture capital fund is about 10 years. You have an option to extend 2 years or so. But you're looking at our stage, for example, when we do pre-seed and seed, you're looking at liquidity events years 5 to 7. That's what we're targeting. And in general, I'm overgeneralizing here, but let's say you want to get to about 100 million in revenue. So you got to kind of ask yourself, like, is that the type of ride that you want to be on from 0 to 100 million? And the work that comes along with that, which is not a passive, hang out on the beach, work a few hours, which I've friends doing, tens of millions of dollars, and they work a couple hours a week. And that's how business is just cruising. This is something like, it's very different. And the context is, we looked at 3,000 companies last year to do 7 investments. And not to say that others weren't a fit for venture, but like in general, I think like probably 1% of all companies that exist there are a fit for venture capital.
For the veterans who are listening, or the active duty service members who are listening, if I love the answer to your question because it makes sense, right? Like most people shouldn't want to take money, but what are you really doing with the money to where, hey, they need that money to take that next step to scale? I'm maybe over representing here, but people listening to the podcast, they might be familiar with like Shark Tank. And some people are like, okay, well, they're providing expertise and maybe some money to extend what they're trying to do as far as what the founder is trying to do. But what are you guys, trying to do to pump steroids into these companies with the investment?
Yeah, it is an important question. And like in every pitch deck, every investor deck, we see there needs to be a use of funds, right? Like and this is actually, I think like it speaks to the beauty of like the venture capital industry and milestone based financing, where, we're not giving companies at the very early stages. If someone comes to us and, hey, I have an idea, you're not giving them $100 million. You're like, ready, go. That's why we have friends and family. You have angels, you have pre-seed, you have seed. And it's because at each round of financing, you're getting enough runway to hit your next big objectives. Then you hit those milestones and then you go out and raise a little bit more. In fact, like the companies that I've seen that raise too much too soon are like crash and burn, right? You're pouring gas on the fire. You haven't quite, certainly at the pre-seed and seed stages, found what we call PMF or product market fit. That generally happens at a series A or later. But I think it's very like intelligently done because it's giving you just enough to scale just enough. And so as far as use of funds, it depends on, because we invest in so many different industries right now. We have space, we have cyber, national security, defense, fintech, a pure B2B SaaS play, more of the initial funds may go towards development. If they already have something really strong and they're looking, this may go more towards like sales and marketing team. It may go more on the deep tech side. It may go towards more of like the technical engineering hires. So the use of funds will always be a little bit different, but that's certainly something we consider. And like, how much are you raising? How much runway does this give you? And what are the milestones that you're going to hit with these funds so that when, usually 12 to 18 months from now, you're raising that next round, where would you be?
Mike, you've obviously looked at a lot of businesses or ideas or people and founders. And this is maybe a cliche question, but what commonalities do you see in these people? Like, let's say a transitioning service member is like, is this actually me? Does this fit kind of my profile, my risk tolerance, all of those things? What have you seen to be those commonalities for the best that have come across your plate?
Yeah, what I'll say is, I'm actually surprised more firms don't have an approach like ours. Historically, VC has been very sector industry focused, right? They just say, all right, we just do B2B SaaS. Every VC loves B2B SaaS. Okay. Then you have some of the specialists and they're doing, okay, we do space, we do prop tech, fintech, health tech, whatever. And I get that, right? I think that's important that you have experts, domain experts, and that you can really add value to all of your portfolio companies. But I'm surprised less firms are putting more weight into the team like we do, especially at the early stages. So every single investor looks at three things, whether they kind of admit it or not. Like three buckets are team, product, and market, right? And under product, you could also say product velocity, aka like traction, like how quickly iterating, improving, and getting into the customer's hand. But team, product, and market. We skew very heavily, obviously, at the early stages towards team because we know product changes. That's just part of the startup journey. It always changes. And the market, you may understand like how big this market is. You may do the TAM SAM model, you like figure all this stuff out, but it's always going to be like shifting a little bit. You can expand it into new markets. You go to adjacent markets, shrink, markets expand. There's just so many things happening. And that's why we focus so much on the team. And this is, Griffin, to your point, like we decided to bet on military veterans. So we think that if you've gone through the world's greatest leadership academy, the United States military, you naturally have the qualities of leadership, resilience, and purpose. And to us, like those three qualities are going to get you so far in anything that you do. So take those and apply them into, someone working a corporate job, they're going to crush it. Like, take those and apply like in anything. So it's a small segment of folks that are going to get into entrepreneurship, let alone, getting into a venture backable company that's trying to grow to 100 million in revenue. I just think in general, veterans are going to crush it in whatever they do. They're going to run through walls. They have a mission in front of them. They're going to make it happen. So that's like number one. And what we look for is, and I might say that's table stakes for us to even look at a company. They have to have a military veteran on the leadership team. Now you start combining that with deep domain expertise and you're like now stacking chips in your favor. We're definitely looking for those folks that either, if they're not the technical co-founder, they have a technical co-founder. They've been doing this a long time. They have a deep understanding of their industry and kind of how to break into it. They have a lot of the relationships there, ability, coachability. I mean, there's so many like different qualities that I could start to rattle off, but and a deep desire to want to do this, kind of like the burn the boats mentality, willing to put it on the line, a deep why. It's actually in the Founder Institute program. It's a 13-week program. The very first week and all the homework they do is around vision and mission, like their personal vision and mission. We ask all of our founders, like, why are you building this? Because, you're giving so many of them are wildly intelligent. They could take, like a $300,000-$400,000 a year job somewhere else doing this thing. And they're paying themselves, barely like livable salaries for something totally uncertain, but because they want their technology to exist, they want to create the solution for their customers. They're like, no, I have to do this. And that's the kind of things we look for, is like those qualities, but also like the hungry founder or team that's like, we have to do this. We care deeply about this.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I agree with that. And I obviously, as a veteran, I'm like, yes, absolutely. The never quit attitude is something to be coveted. But my question with that is, I'm going to draw it back to something I heard about West Point faculty and the cadets at West Point. West Point, compared to the Naval Academy and the Air Force Academy, has a higher percentage of actual active duty officers as instructors. And one of the negatives of that was brought up, like, they just don't let cadets fail, because it's like hey, like, let's pick up the team. We're military officers. We don't let college students fail, because, but, maybe a civilian college professor might not have that same sort of mentality. So how do you incorporate that, or how do you guide somebody who might be on the verge of like, hey, maybe we should pivot to something else, but just is clinching with white knuckles onto their idea and doesn't want to give up?
Yeah. The thing we look for is actually being obsessed with the problem. And you'll notice, like, it's not being obsessed with the solution, it's being obsessed with the problem, because the solution will change. And, this is also why I love entrepreneurship, is a certainly, look, we come alongside our founders. The NCC limit for LPs, limited partners and funds, is 99. We have 99. Like, we upper max, in our firm. And we did that very strategically because they're domain experts. Like, we have General Trent Edwards, who's in charge of standing up the budget for Space Force. We have 4-star General Crystal. We have Deepak Chopra on the mindfulness side. We have these like rock stars that we were very intentional in building so that they could come alongside our founders. But at the end of the day, also, Jack, like, there is a time, like, and this is the power law in venture. I want every single portfolio company to succeed. Of course, like, we wouldn't invest if we don't want their solutions to be a positive impact in the world. But the power law is, it's 1 or 2 companies in the portfolio that are going to return the entire fund. And so knowing that the majority of them, like the overwhelming majority, will fail. Like, we do also have, like, you have to be okay with that. And even a step before that, you have to be okay, to your point, of like pivoting and not being so attached and white knuckling this thing that you're just going to go to the bottom of the sea with it. In fact, like, if founders, like, they gave it everything they got and we saw that they're like figuring it out and iterating, like, a failure is an absolute okay thing. In fact, again, we live in this country, I would even say, yeah, tell us your next startup. We'll invest in you then. Like, it's very normal. Like, failure is a part of this process, and I don't know if like celebrated is the right word, but I think we need to like embrace it. And that's okay when those things happen, as long as, like, obviously everything is done above board, ethically, high integrity, because it is also a small, like, startup and VC community where everyone knows everyone. And yeah, I don't know if that was a direct answer, but that kind of felt like I want to share that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Based on what you asked.
No, I love that framework. Obsession with the problem, not the proposed
Yes.
solution, because that solution inevitably is going to change, and the market will inform, all kinds of things will inform a better solution. So I love that reframe. Mike, I'm also curious, maybe it's a little bit of a pivot here, but I know you do work in underdeveloped communities, specifically in Mexico, and I'm assuming elsewhere, and you've traveled a fair amount. Jack and I actually originally met in Germany, stationed there with the Army, and traveled a lot through Europe. And so we too share a love for traveling the world and seeing different places and cultures. Can you share a little bit about how your travel and the work that you do in Mexico and otherwise has informed not only your professional and business world, but kind of just your worldview in general?
Yeah, appreciate you asking too. It's not something I talk about often, but I'm just like very grateful to be able to participate. The story is, I was invited 13 years ago on a house build project in Mexico. So for those that haven't been, San Diego is very close to the Mexican border. And there's, you drive 2.5 hours, you cross the border, you hug the coast, you pass Tijuana, Rosarito, Ensenada, and then the town south of that is a town called Monteadero. And friend invited me, and it was the woman Cindy who was doing it for her birthday, building a home for her family. So we get there on Friday at noon, and 48 hours later, Saturday or Sunday at noon, the house is built, and the families there are living on dirt, like actual dirt. It's the communities, 13 years later is much better than it was. But at the time, like infant mortality rates were high. They weren't naming kids until they were, a year old because they didn't want to get attached to them because, they just had such a high likelihood of like not surviving. And they were sick all the time. And there were just so many like, things going on. Like that's just what happens when you live on dirt and you have, pallets for walls and maybe a tarp for a roof. And it's freezing cold, in the winter, and it's way too hot in the summer. And so we go in 48 hours, like they go from a dirt floor to a 2-bedroom home, cement slab, foundation, like insulation, electric, and the family's walking in and I lost it. Man. I was so emotional. I was like, oh my God. And I had to like, when I got back to San Diego, I had to think about why it hit me the way that it did. Like, why was I so emotional? I'm like, Marine, I don't cry, And I just had this like kind of realization that, man, like life's short. And if we have the opportunity to help people, like in a way that feels like true to us, let's do that the best we can. And so I like it just threw a small group together, put it out to, social media, asked some friends who wants to come do a house build with me. And, some people raised their hand and then did it again and again. And we've done them, for now 13 years, almost every quarter. It brought close to 2,500 people down, probably close to 100 homes have been built. And I thought at some point the novelty would wear off. I thought it would start to become less impactful, or I'd be like, oh, it's just another house. But no, like I bawled my eyes out every time the family walks in. And here's the best part. This is my favorite part about the whole thing. Now, there have been so many people that have come on the projects with me that then have gone on and led their own. And then someone went on that and led their own. And so now there's second, third, fourth order consequences of people going down there. And you would hardly recognize the community now because I was just there less than a month ago. We do them every January, April, July, and October. So just three weeks ago, we were there. And, now it's like you drive by and you see all the like green, blue, pink houses that have been built in that community. It's just like, it's crazy. And to me, it's incredibly, I'm all about efficiency. Like I love, things and systems that are efficient. And to me, I look at that and it's say from an input versus output standpoint, it's almost unmatched. The input is 48 hours, a group of 20 to 30 people, and you raise $15,000. And for that input, the output is like a multi-generational impact for this family. The kids, they can now, they're safe, they're healthy, the kids can have an education. They don't have to, it's crazy. Like it's an outsized return on the effort placed into it. And so, and since then we've done some interesting projects that we've helped build schools in Central and South America. We've done some impact projects in Kenya and Bali, Cambodia. We did like a micro entrepreneurship where we taught women how to make bracelets in the floating island or the floating village of Vietnam. So, like $20, they can get a kit. They can turn that $20 into $200 by selling bracelets in the market. Part of the give back was as soon as they get that first $200, the first thing they do is they give a $20 kit to another woman so she can do that. So it's kind of like spreading entrepreneurship, and I don't know, I'm trying to help people best we can, but I love that stuff, man. It'll always be kind of part of what I do.
That's amazing. And I assume just look on your website, people can find out about those trips and going on those trips through your website. And we'll of course share that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. The good thing is like, it's a good problem to have, but the builds fill up really fast. I think like we're full for all of next year. And so like the next available one is in 2026, which actually is like, it's my secret plan because people go, oh, I guess I have to do my own. And then they, instead of just showing up and joining ours, they have to get and lead their own. It's all part of my secret plan.
The supply and demand is just way out of whack. Well, Mike, this has been fantastic. There's one 2-part question we ask every guest, and it's one ask and one give. So we'll start with the first part. Is there one ask that you might have, one way that people listening to this could provide value to you or help you in any way?
The ask, is we are in a heavy deployment cycle, meaning we're making, as I mentioned, 10 more investments in the next year or so. So if anyone knows a great veteran-led startup in the early stages, again, we try to come in sub $20 million valuation caps, that their technology is advancing America in some way. Again, it can be in a number of industries, but yeah, send them our way. And that's a veteran.fund/startup, or you'll see that on our website. You just apply for funding. And we write, again, average check size is probably 500K. We'll go up to like 1.5 million, but our sweet spot's probably 500 at the early stage. So that would be the ask, is great companies, great founders. We'd love to see them. The give would be probably the Founder Institute program. I started that as a way of sending the elevator back down. It's all the things. It took me 10 years of fumbling my way through entrepreneurship. All those things I mentioned with HMS Fitness and Karuna Towels and Wildfire and Nourish Me. It's like they're getting that 10 years worth of knowledge in 3 months by going through that course. Cause I also brought in all of my like investor friends, all my angel investors and VCs and mentors that are part of the program and helping the founders. So I would say if you're, a veteran military connected entrepreneur that's thinking about entrepreneurship, while JP Morgan is still generously, giving folks fellowships to go through it, take advantage of it. There's nothing to lose. And it's totally okay to go through that program and halfway through realize, you know what, I don't want to do this. Like, better you figure that out in a month and a half than spending years of your life and hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to build something and trying to do it on your own. Like, again, it took me 10 years. People can do it in 3 months.
What an
Is
amazing
that
program.
something that needs to be, is that like a full-time commitment, or is that something they could do while active duty?
They can do it as active duty. So in general, yeah, as long as they're prepared for about 25 hours, we call it 25 hours of company building work per week. Most folks that go through are not full-time in their company. In order for them to graduate to the next level of program, which is free to the alumni, it's called Funding Lab. They do have to be full-time. They have to have a full-time team, because that program is exclusively focused on going out and raising capital. So 95% of the founders in that program close their pre-seed or seed rounds. But no, this is kind of for call it like the startup curious, or like, hey, do I want to be a founder? But an important note is it's not a learning program. It's a doing program. Like in order to graduate, you have to eventually by week 8, you incorporate as a Delaware C Corp. You have to engage in a legal firm. It's very much doing, not learning.
And is it in person?
All virtual. We do our graduation mixer in San Diego. In fact, it's a week from today. Are you guys in San Diego?
I wish. I'm in.
No, I'm on Oahu actually.
There you go. I was stationed there. Kind of what you think.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jack's out in Hawaii. I'm in the San Diego of the East Coast, Raleigh, North Carolina.
There you go. San Diego, the East Coast. Dude, Jack, you're living the life. I love Oahu. I miss that place.
Yeah. Army brought us here about 5 years ago, and I'm about 6 months post getting out of the Army. So we ended up staying here. Yeah.
Yeah. Exciting. What can I help you guys with?
No, I think you're helping us plenty, Mike, with your time here. This has been fantastic. I will certainly be looking into the Founder Institute, both for myself and for a lot of people that I know that are transitioning out or already have made the transition. But this is fantastic, man. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us, and hopefully we can meet you in person before too long. Jack, what about you?
Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing I could say is happy belated birthday. My dad had a cake a couple nights ago. He's also enlisted Marine, so we had cake at his house. He moved here a couple of years ago, so we still break out the cake even years after he got out.
It's so funny. I still can't help it whenever I'm at an event, because I was, like startup event, everyone's all formal, they've got their suits on. Anytime someone mentions, like they get on my phone, they mention Marine, it's just like raw. Like you just hear like the raws like come from the audience. I can't help it. I feel like I'm brainwashed.
Absolutely. I wonder. So I heard there's definitely a higher percentage of veterans, but there's also just like enlisted Marines, man. There's something about them that they go solve problems, and obviously being raised by an enlisted Marine, he was a unique guy, but I just feel like, I don't know what they do to you guys, but they know how to create them.
It's funny. It's funny you mentioned that. We've got a group of us because there aren't many of us. In fact, like my buddy Tim Shaw that runs, Context Ventures, and he runs the Military Veteran Startup Conference, which, by the way, I recommend to everyone. If there's like one event a year, it happens in February every year. It's MVS, Military Veteran Summit, or Military Veteran Conference, Startup Conference. But one of our portfolio companies, David Kervin, also enlisted Marine. Like we kind of have like a little group of us, and it's not many. It'll be like 5, 6 of us. And anytime we find another enlisted Marine doing something badass, like this guy, we immediately bring it, like add them to the circle. And I mean, not a political statement, but I'll just throw it out there. JD Vance,
Right. There you go.
enlisted Marine, VP.
Yep.
Well, you mentioned
Yep.
loving efficiency. That's why you would have loved the Army, because it's the most efficient organization ever we've ever.
Yeah, no inefficiencies there at all.
Awesome, Mike. We'll let you get back to your afternoon here, but thanks again for hopping on here with us. And this has been awesome.
Yeah, thanks guys. Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Veteran Ventures podcast. If you heard something interesting or found the show to be helpful, send it to a friend who is transitioning out of the military or considering a transition. We'd also really appreciate if you left a rating and review of the show. That helps us reach more people with these amazing stories of successful veterans. We'll catch you next time on the Veteran Ventures podcast. And until then, go do the thing. Make that decision, have that conversation, and go find your next.